I'm Jessica Liou, a partner in the Restructuring Department here at Weil, and I also serve on the Philanthropic Committee. In this edition of the Weil Alumni Interview Series, I'm delighted to speak with Jessica Diab, a Senior Vice President with Brookfield Asset Management. Jessica first came to Weil as a summer associate in 2011 before joining us in 2012 as an associate in our Restructuring Department, then known as Business Finance and Restructuring. 6 years later, she moved in-house to Brookfield, where she has since risen through the ranks and was promoted to Senior Vice President in 2023. At Brookfield, Jessica currently focuses on M&A for Brookfield's renewable power and energy transition funds, and is actively involved in Brookfield's Women's Network, having chaired the committee for several years. Jessica, thank you for joining us for this interview. I'm personally delighted to interview a friend and former colleague. Since joining Brookfield in 2018, you've transitioned roles. Can you tell us a bit about your journey at Brookfield and what you enjoy most about your current role as an SVP within Brookfield's renewable and energy transition business?
Sure. And let me just say, it's really nice to be here with you, and thank you so much for having me. So, as you mentioned, I joined Brookfield in 2018. It was right around this time that Brookfield had put in place a chief legal officer and head of strategy at Brookfield Asset Management, which you could think of as sort of the parent company for Brookfield. Justin, who stepped into that role, was responsible for all legal matters that related to the asset management business. It's a public company, so that included all the public company disclosures, corporate governance, capital markets, and strategic initiatives for the franchise. And I supported him across all of those functions. And in fact, one of the first transactions I did after joining Brookfield was our acquisition of Oaktree Capital Management, and Weil advised us on that transaction. So it was really wonderful to be working with some of my former colleagues on that deal. One of the other strategic initiatives that Brookfield focused on in late 2021 was developing its first impact fund. Impact funds are funds that have a dual mandate, so they're investing to earn attractive returns for their limited partners, but also to make a meaningful environmental or social impact. And so I was involved in the early stages of thinking through that strategy. Ultimately, it developed into a strategy focused on facilitating the transition to a net zero world. And so the natural home for that strategy was within our existing renewable power and energy transition business. So I moved with the strategy into that group and was very involved in the early days when we were fundraising and setting up the fund. And I again, worked very closely with Weil, with Andrew Chiswick and his team. And now, as you mentioned, I focus on M&A for that strategy, so deploying the capital for that strategy.
That's great. I know that while you were here at Weil, you were focused primarily on restructuring. And obviously, you were a big law associate. It must have required some transition to move from a big law associate role to in-house. What did you find most challenging about that transition? And what did you find challenging about the transition from becoming a restructuring associate to an in-house M&A lawyer?
So I personally did find it to be a really big transition. One thing I'll mention is Brookfield is an open concept floor plan, so we don't have our own offices. And that, strangely enough, was a huge transition for me, because you feel like everyone's listening to your conversations all the time. In fact, they're not. Everyone's busy doing their own thing. But when I first moved over, I found that really awkward, especially if my husband calls me, I would just hang up on him. I wouldn't speak to him at my desk. I've since gotten over that, and I actually find the open concept to be really effective. But I guess joking aside, I think for me, the biggest transition was moving from someone who's giving advice to being the person who had to sort of take that advice and make a decision, and then sort of live with the consequences in a very real way of that decision. I remember in those early days getting on calls with senior partners, and they would be laying out the legal considerations. And then at the end of the call, I would sort of be sitting there, oh, I have to make this decision. And it was a transition for me. It took some time, I think, for me to develop the confidence to make those decisions. And, the more informed you are, from a business perspective, but also from a legal perspective, the easier it is to make those decisions. And I think one benefit of restructuring is that we do see there is sort of a diversity in the practice. You do get a lot of exposure to different areas of law and to different businesses. And I think that helps me sort of get comfortable with making decisions about areas that I might not be intimately familiar with. But I would say, for any lawyer who is maybe thinking about a lawyer in private practice, thinking about the transition in-house, there's no better environment than a law firm to really learn about different areas of law. You have so many resources and so many smart, talented people in close proximity to you. Of course, we all have time constraints. But I can even think back, Jessica, to, I'm embarrassed to admit this, but sometimes I'd be on a conference call and then you turn things over to tax and I'd be like, oh, that's tax, I'm going to zone out. But in fact, you cannot make a business decision, in-house without thinking through the tax implications. And so even the simple exercise of just staying focused on what some of your other functional groups are thinking about can really position you well, in my view, in advance of a transition in-house.
Well, that's great. I'm really happy to hear that your experience at Weil prepared you well for that transition. And what would you say in terms of offering advice to other Weil alum who are looking to make a successful transition from big law into an in-house role? What kind of advice would you offer them?
Yeah, so I think, again, just this point of while you're at the law firm, just trying to absorb as much information as you can about not only your practice area, but different areas of law. Because when you transition in-house, sort of irrespective of, I do M&A, but that's not to say I can ignore employment, tax, other areas of law. They all sort of come to my desk. And I don't think I'm expected to be an expert in every area, but I'm expected to be able to speak confidently, at least at a preliminary level, about these topics. So in-house lawyers just inevitably have to be generalists, and the more exposure you can get while you're in a firm and you have all these resources available to you, the better positioned you'll be as you move into that more generalist role.
That's fantastic. So now that you are experiencing the law from the client side, what would you say distinguishes a Weil lawyer from a client's perspective?
I have three things I think that I can say on this one. The first is understanding your client's business can really distinguish you. And it sounds obvious, but actually taking time to understand your client's business takes time. It can feel like an investment that doesn't always have immediate rewards, because you could spend time reading their annual report, looking through their website, reading other public disclosures, and there's no work product that you're generating as a result. But your advice is so much more effective if you can understand the nature of your client's business and their ultimate commercial objectives. Because I think this leads me to my second point. One of the things that I think really distinguish external counsel for us is lawyers who can anticipate issues or issues that may arise and as a result have an adverse impact on our objectives. You can't really identify those issues if you don't know what your client's objectives are. So I think what's great is when I get a phone call from an external counsel saying, hey, I know one of your business group's goals is to do XYZ, but we're hearing that there might be this change of law, and I think we should think about how you're going to manage that, as opposed to sort of me always having to call counsel and say, I have this problem. So the more we can get ahead of problems, of course, the better. And I think in order to be able to anticipate issues, you really need to understand your client's business. And then I think the last point, which I think every Brookfield lawyer will probably say, is at least for us, we really think about risks relative to value, because we take lots of risks. We're not in the business of making risk-free investments. And we really benefit from counsel who can help us think about risks in that lens. So thinking about what are the commercial objectives, what is the probability that this risk is going to materialize, what are the real likely, not theoretical, but likely, consequences or adverse impacts of this risk. Because, ultimately we want to achieve the commercial objectives, and we really need counsel to partner with us to come up with creative solutions that enable us to get to where we want to be. So really just understanding risk in the context of the business goals and value, and just being able to take a commercial and pragmatic approach to risk assessment.
That makes a lot of sense. At the end of the day, Brookfield is a business, right? And I think it would be hard to completely eradicate risk from all potential transactions. And so that makes a lot of sense that as a part of your role and a part of your advisor's role, it's to help you weigh and judge those risks against the ability to achieve your commercial objective and operate a business. So thank you for sharing that. We recently published here at Weil a Weil Women's Wisdom Series, asking various leaders here what lessons they would share with their younger selves. From your perspective, what lesson would you share with your younger self?
I'm sure if you asked me this at some other point in time in my career, the advice I would give would be different. But I think in this moment, the advice I would give my younger self would be to be patient. I think careers are very long, and there are ups and downs, and there will be, periods where you're working on the most high profile, exciting deal or matter. And there will be periods where you are not. And I think this is ability to kind of take a deep breath and not constantly be trying or panicking if you are not constantly like progressing, promoting, working on the most important or what you think are the most important things. I think what I've seen in my career so far is that there can be real value and, in fact, really meaningful opportunities that can come out of just doing an excellent job at what you've been asked to do, whether it's the most high profile task or not. And also, organizations, firms, they evolve and things change naturally. And if you're constantly trying to manipulate for a certain outcome, you actually might deprive yourself of kind of a natural opportunity that might arise. So, of course, we're all ambitious and, we need to be strategic from time to time. But I think what I've seen over the course of my career is there can also just be real value in being patient and just doing good work and sort of letting things shake out as they will. I don't know, that might seem like a counterintuitive or a controversial piece of advice, but in my experience, I have actually seen that can really be rewarding from time to time.
Yeah. So taking a longer view on your perspective regarding your career.
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly. Yeah.
So we're still glad to know that you're connected to the Weil network. I know you keep in touch with many people here at Weil who are former colleagues. What significance do those relationships continue to have for you, especially the relationships coming from the Restructuring Department here at Weil?
They mean so much to me, what I would say. Just first transitioning to Brookfield, I think being a Weil alumni gave me a lot of confidence as I moved into a role that I really knew very little about. So for me personally, just coming from Weil and having that as part of my career history really gave me, I think, confidence as part of that transition. And then I and still today really reached out to my relationships at Weil. Some of them I developed in my time at Weil, and some of them I've developed over my time at Brookfield. But the folks there have been so instrumental and helpful as I tried to, learn all these different areas of law that I've, practiced initially, and even moving into the Renewable group and more of an M&A focus has been a huge transition. And on many occasions, I've reached out to my colleagues at Weil for their kind of off the record guidance. And it's really been, I can't say enough about how valuable that's been. And then just personally, still to this day, some of my closest friends are from my time at Weil, and I value those relationships so much. And really, Jessica thinks so fondly about my time at Weil and the memories I have to really, really cherish them. It's such a special place, and I am so grateful to have started my career there.
We're so happy to hear that. And of course, we're so grateful to have had you start your career here.
Thank you.
Jessica, it was wonderful to speak with you today, and I thank you for joining us. And I wish you continued future success in your long and fruitful legal career. And for the alumni, thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to providing you more programming and communications from Weil in this alumni interview series. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Jessica.